Good morning. Good morning. This is Biniam on the Bin Checkin In podcast. Today is the 26th, the 26th of October, 2021. So glad to have you guys joining me again for this episode. Good morning, Shar. I see you, my dear. Um, Welcome again to the 82nd episode of the Bin Checkin In podcast. This is a Tuesday. So happy Tuesday. The week continues to progress forward. As you can see behind me, the sun is shining. It's a fantastic start to the morning. Yeah, my kind of morning. And it's not too cold yet, which is pretty much a bonus in this part of the world. But I'm so glad to have you guys joining in. And today we are doing the same thing we always do on the Bin Checkin In podcast. We got 3 pillars that we continue to work off of in our pursuit of growth personally. The 3 pillars again are let's try put them in the right sequence: awareness, kindness, and happiness. Awareness because it's really helpful to know who we are and how we're wired, how we're engaging the world that we're in, and how we can make the best choices as we're going forward. Kindness in the sense of showing ourselves kindness as we change, as we evolve, as we grow, as we shift into what we feel our values resonate with. Kindness because it's a hard thing to be patient with ourselves and say, hey, I'm trying to figure things out and I'm doing the best that I can. It's easier for us to rip ourselves apart and say, man, we are so like behind the ball. We are so not where we ought to be. We are really good at ripping ourselves. What does that look like for us to extend kindness to ourselves, that degree of patience? And finally, happiness. Happiness because it's a fantastic thing, feeling happy in the midst of the other emotions. I do not want to downplay the other emotions and say they're not important. They're so important. But happiness is a lot of fun to experience. And in my experience, I found it best to work our way towards genuine expressions of happiness by processing the other ones. This is the 82nd episode of the Bin Checkin In podcast. So glad to have you guys. Do you see how we're progressing towards the 3-digit mark at 100 episodes? We got to do something special for the 100th episode, right? But nonetheless, I am happy that you are here with me this morning, spending a few moments as we check in, as we check in and see how we're doing, how we're evolving, how we're growing, how we are developing, and we're doing that in a community together. You know, one of those things I feel that is really it's one of those almost like necessities of our human existence is who our people are, finding who our people are at. Hello, Gonzo. Nice to see you, my friend. Let's vibe it out here. Absolutely. Who are our people in community? You know, it is a really beautiful thing when you can find those kind of individuals. NHL Canada, I see you. How are you? Who are our people in community that we can lock arms with and do this thing called life? Because goodness, you know, life is already challenging on its own. And it's even more challenging when we have to face it on our own, right? But when we're able to kind of walk into it and experience it in community, that's a fantastic thing. In fact, today's question we're asking, today's self reflection question we're asking, I needed to get some help because I was having some trouble figuring it out for myself. So I asked my son for some input. I asked my sister as well. And when you hear the question, you'll be like, are you serious, Betty? Did you really need help with that one? Bini, salam. Salam. Indemna Dirk, Jonathan. Good bout to oh, have a great day at school, NHL. So yes, today's question. Let me, without further ado, jump right in. What bad habits would you like to get rid of? What bad habits would you like to get rid of in your life? And what steps do you need to take to make that happen? What bad habits do you have that you want to get rid of? And what steps are you going to take to make that happen? So there's 2 parts to this question we're addressing today. Why was I having such trouble with this question for such a long time? And why did I need to seek some help from my community? Before I answer that question, let me just explain how helpful it is to be in community. Because let me share with you my experience. Here I am in community. I've cultivated some friendships. I've cultivated some close connections with my family and friends so that we are like sorry, I'm just reading my comments here. We are like a waterfall, BC. We might go down, but overall, we are still the same person. We're like a waterfall because there we are. We might go down, but overall, we're still, I see. And that's like again a process of change, isn't it? Good observation there, Gonzo. So here's what I wanted to get to. Here I am struggling with an answer to this question. And when I have trouble, if I don't have those connections relationally already made, then I'm kind of stuck. I'm kind of stuck because I'm like, I only have me to depend on. But when we're in a community, we have some help from those that know us really well that can speak into our context and suggest things from their observations. So I was able to reach out to some of those close to me and say, so based on what you guys know of me, what do you think would be really helpful for me to be aware of? Because I'm not seeing it as well as I'd like. And they were able to think through and sort of deliberate with me and say, here's what our observation is on this frontier. And so that's how we were able to proceed forward. My son is only 8 years old. And so I was still able to ask him and say, so what do you think? Again, I was only able to ask him because I value that connection that I have with him in such a way, in such a way that yeah, I'd like for him to be able to speak freely without any fear of censure. I'd like to have that relationship, that foundational relationship that enables him to be able to say, "Here's my mind, Dad," and I don't have to, fear you hearing it. And so that's an important thing. I want to learn from those who are younger and those who are older because they have insights, they have perspectives that are inaccessible to me. And the only way I have access is if I develop that kind of rapport to be able to have them voluntarily and willingly share their thoughts because that's a very vulnerable thing, isn't it? So, my son was able to give me some inputs. My sister was able to give me some input. And yet, hello, Brandon, I see you, my friend. And yet, I was, yeah, it was still a challenge. We were just kind of sitting there saying, let's really think on this one here. Glad it made sense because I couldn't type more. That's all right, Gonzo. So here is us diving into this question here. Let me, before I answer my own question, talk about some of the merits of this question. What bad habits would you like to get rid of? That's almost implying that we do have bad habits, isn't it? That we have things that we're practicing along the way that don't quite resonate with what we would like to be modeling or acting from. Now, an example that I was thinking of is when we first learned to drive a car. I don't know if you remember when you first were going for your practice drives, and maybe you went with a family member, maybe you went with a professional instructor, yet the investment of energy was going into teaching us the right way to stay on the road, how to come to a complete stop at a stop sign, how to watch the signs on the road so that we're obeying them and not going too fast or breaking the rules that the posted signs are communicating to us. So we're practicing as well as we can how to drive carefully, right? We want to drive the speed limit. We want to be aware of other motorists. We want to make sure we're coming to a complete stop instead of a rolling stop at a stop sign. We want to a whole bunch of variety of things that we had to work on, right? And as we're working on these things, we're working on them with great care because we are fearful of how specific our road tester is going to be. Are they going to be really strict? I want to make sure I got everything in order so that I can pass that test, right? I still don't have my licenses, Brandon. Oh, darn it. Um, I I'm not sure if it's something that it's in your forecast that you want to aim for, but it'd be amazing if you're able to get it because there's such a degree of liberty and independence one is able to get. I know because when I don't have my vehicle, I really feel like I'm stuck, right? Hello, Vergs. How are you? So, yes, what does that look like for us when we are practicing for that road test to get everything exactly right? There's no room for error on this one here, right? There are no bad habits that we can facilitate in the midst of our practice because practicing those bad habits will get us a fail on our test. And so we're very concerned about that. And so it's with great trepidation, it's with great concern and anxiety that we will go into our road test, trying to make sure that all of our bad habits have been sort of dealt with and we don't have any. And so there we are on the road test and trying to get everything correct so that we can pass that test. But then here's what happens. Here's what usually happens. After you pass the road test, you've got everything done, stellar on that road test, and you've passed without failing. You're like, yes, this is amazing. For most of us, we start to slack big time. We start to like really slack big time on our road handling skills of our vehicle. and we start to cut corners. We may go a little faster and get used to going a little faster than the speed limit. We may relax our posture. We don't hold the steering wheel with both hands at the 10 o'clock and the 2 o'clock. We may just hold on with one hand now. We may just relax those measures. We may, at a stop sign, come to a rolling stop, if even that is an effort. Sometimes we just roll right through after doing our shoulder check. We are slack on our shoulder checks. We're slack on being aware of all the other vehicles and driving defensively. There's so many bad habits that we start letting creep up. And so we end up being terrible drivers because we were not on top of ensuring that we were trying to be, forthright with keeping up with those good habits. We let a lot of bad habits creep in. Again, the question we're asking is, what bad habits would you like to get rid of, and what steps do you need to make that happen? Another example I was thinking of is, if you've got a green thumb and you've got a garden and it's a beautiful garden, you start off really well. Everything is immaculate in that garden. There's no expression of weeds that are growing, and you've got all your plants there. But then you start taking it easy and you see a few weeds coming up, but you're like, I'm too lazy to deal with those. I'll just tend with them whenever. And so you ignore them until your garden is overrun by weeds. And so the weeds are like expression of the bad habits that you started off with, not expressing, but then eventually you're like, one of the things I'm working on is making sure I have good handwriting or printing, right? That's a really important thing for me. And so, even with that there, I was thinking about how I it takes a lot of work to work on that until it becomes practice, like until it becomes normal for you to write in a certain way. If your handwriting's messy, that's like a bad habit, perhaps, right? That you want to clean up, and so you start practicing and printing or writing as well as you can. Eventually, it becomes better, but it takes some time to get there, doesn't it? So that's another example. So that's something that I was thinking of while addressing this one here. I think we all have expressions of bad habits. Sometimes for people like me, it's not easy to see because we're working so hard and try to make sure that we're on top of these elements that, yeah, they kind of slip by our radar when we are unaware. And so it takes someone else to give us a heads up on, here's what it could be for you in your expression of a bad habit. Okay, that's helpful. So, what bad habits would we like to get rid of? It implies that we all have bad habits and that we are interested in getting rid of those bad habits. Primarily, I would say because for most of us, those bad habits get in the way of efficiency, right? Efficiency in getting stuff done. And I'll share with you how that's one of my nemesis in struggling with efficiency. What steps do you need to take to make this happen? That's the second part of this. And that is, again, that kindness piece that also has action behind it and saying, hey, while you're addressing these areas, these bad habits, don't move into that zone. Be aware of what the bad habits are, but don't move into that zone where you're like, oh, woe's me, I'm terrible for this, or I don't do well at this, or whatever expression that is. Instead, shift that into a different gear and saying, I acknowledge that this bad habit exists. I'm going to be kind to myself as I move forward in shifting into something different. And what does that look like, that shift? What are we going to do to get rid of these bad habits? What steps do we need to take to make addressing these bad habits and then nullifying them come to pass? So that is the question we are answering today in this episode. What are my bad habits? Can I tell you, I'm at that point in my list of self reflection questions that I'm going through personally. By the way, if you do not know, this podcast is, I hope it serves you well. I hope it encourages you in your context as you hear my experiences. But my primary reason for doing this podcast is my benefit, my benefit, because as I discipline myself to attend to me in the awareness piece, in the kindness piece, and in the happiness piece, I am working on intentionally becoming a better version of me. I'm working on being aware of those things that I need to be aware of in my own experience and my own existence. Hello, Brandon. And what does that look like now for me to move on to that next place of, okay, this is really important for me in my evolution? And it just so happens that you guys get to watch that process and be a part of that. So thank you again for listening in. Thank you for taking the time, investing your time. I don't think it's time wasted. In fact, it's the kind of collaboration where we want to grow together. And Connor, how are you, my man? Good to see you coming on here. So, the question again for those of you guys just coming in, what bad habits would you like to get rid of? What steps do you need to make that happen? And I'm about to dive into mine. Now, I'm at the end of like there's a list of self-reflection questions that I've been going through for some months now, and there are some really juicy ones there that I was so excited about answering. I was like, this is excellent. I can't wait to tackle this or get into this. And as that list of really juicy selection of questions started um, being answered, I was left with the ones that I was like, I'm not so keen on this question here because I don't know what to think about this question. I don't know how to answer this question. I don't know how it reflects or relates to me. And so this is one of those questions that I was struggling with. I was struggling with this question because I was like, I've been working on myself for quite some time now, and I'm trying to work on the bad habits. What are those bad habits that I have? And what do I need to work on them? Because when you're actively working on yourself, you're trying to be aware of all areas that you see as red flags. And as you start addressing those and working through those, you're also watching for other things. And so it becomes more difficult, I found in my experience, to be watching out for those elements that sort of tie into and say, okay, this is an expression that I need to account for, or it's not really helpful, right? And so what does that look like? So that's what I've been processing and working my way through. What bad habits? This is so difficult, actually, that was something I had to do. Believe it or not, something I really had to do on this one here was I needed to ask some help from my sister who lives with me and say, hey, tell me from what you know about me, what are some of my bad habits? I didn't just stop there. I also went on and asked my son, my 8-year-old son, saying, because he's hanging out with me for the day again today. We're doing homeschooling because he's got a few friends at school who were sick, and so they kind of have this policy. And so he hangs out with me yesterday, today. It's a lot of fun. We're doing homeschooling together and guy stuff. And yeah, he's just sitting over yonder doing his reading for the day. But he also gave me some insights, and he was very eager to give me insights, saying, "Dad, here's what you need to consider." It was so good. It was so good. My sister was just laughing. This is difficult for me, like I was saying, because I've been actively working on my bad habits and trying to work on them because I've had a plethora of them. And I'm in a new season where I feel like I'm not the same person I once was. But here's some of my bad habits that I had to work through. And I just thought of another one while we were talking earlier. But let me give you the ones that they suggested first. This is one that my son has been working on with me for a while, and you'll laugh when you hear this. He's only 8 years old, but he's a pretty special kid. One of the things he's always on my case for is I like to communicate. Like you guys know, I love to talk. I love to share my experiences. I love to engage with others, and there's not much that's going to get in my way to doing that. Hi, Ollie. Nice to see you, my friend. Now, while I am in the midst of expressing my desire to communicate, I usually also sometimes struggle with reflecting on when's the right time to open my mouth and communicate and when's the right time to keep it shut. And so something my son is always on my case for, always on my case for. And he has learned to communicate this in a really gentle and gracious way, which I really love about him because once upon a time it was different, but like he's learned some tactical skills in communicating his observations. But he says to me, Dad, you need to chew your food with your mouth closed. Don't talk when your mouth is full of food. This is something that he's always on my case for so often. And I try to remember because I mean it's a legitimate reminder, right? It's something that he's reminding me saying, Dad, this is going to be in your benefit. Attend to this. This is really important for you. And so I appreciate him for doing that. It's just I get so excited. I'm like, I gotta talk about this. Ah! And then he's like, Dad, you're talking with food in your mouth again. So I super appreciate his input. I really do. And I still continue to struggle. So that's one of my bad habits that I couldn't think about until I asked for help. And so he's like, Oh, Dad, I got one for you. Try this one here. I'm like, "Oh, you're totally right. You're totally right. I need to work on that. I'm on it." So that's something that he has been helping me out with in a very active way. Now, something I've done is I've tried to catch him in that same thing. So I'll wait till he has food in his mouth, and then I'll ask him a question that I'll feel he really wants to answer to see if he's going to talk with food in his mouth. And I've not been able to catch him. He is so on his game in this department. This is not one of his bad habits. He is so on his game. He's like, okay, he'll give you like just that indication that says, because he is mindful that he has food in his mouth. He finishes his mouthful and then he answers. And I'm like, oh, I can't even get him. I can't even like trick him into it. He's just sitting there on the couch giggling while trying to pretend that he's focusing on his book. I love you, buddy. Oh man. So yeah, I needed help to observe that one there. That was not easy for me to be aware of, but that's one of my bad habits. And that's a really helpful bad habit that he is that he is walking alongside with me on. And you see the importance now of community, how if I didn't have this community around me, if I didn't have these people around me who could speak their minds freely and openly without any fear of censure, saying, how dare you, like making them feel terrible, that I wouldn't have access to becoming a better me. So here's one of those things that's really helpful that I found even in this question is to be aware of oneself. It's really helpful to be in community so that there are those in your life who can speak into your experience, who can speak into your context and share with you their observations. Such a critical thing, I think, really important, in the absence of which you are the poor, right? You don't have that kind of rapport, that kind of investment of others that is willing to speak truth to power. And I say that especially because it is not an easy thing to speak truth to power. And what that phrase means to me is when you are in a position that is lower in hierarchy of whatever context to someone who is higher than you. For example, an employer to their no, employee to their employer. That's speaking truth to power. So let's say that employer is really angry and they're always like grumpy. And so for an employee to go and bring that observation to the employer's attention, that's speaking truth to power in a very vulnerable way because the employer may get really ticked off and fire that employee. That's a risky thing, for example, to extend oneself and be able to communicate that, for example, right? Speaking truth to power. So it's the same thing even with my son to his parents, right? A child to the parent, unless there is that rapport where there's an equality established of communication that says, hey, I'm accessible. You don't have to have this fear element. That's really important to inculcate, right? Now, this is not a parenting podcast, but one of the things I do want to ensure that is that my kids know that there is that differentiation, that there is there is um, there is a flow of direction that is to be followed there, right? So even as he's encouraged me saying, Dad, don't forget, don't talk with food in your mouth. And I'm like, that's a really important one. I want to bind myself to that because that is a principle, that's an ideal or an ideology that I want to sign up for that we both have in common, right? But I still retain that right to be able to tell him, this is your bedtime. He can't tell me, this is your bedtime, Dad. Right? Because there is a differentiation there of how he's learning how to acknowledge responsibilities, what he can handle and what he can't handle, right? And that will, of course, continue to grow as he grows older in his ability to handle more and more responsibility that I give him, saying, hey, by all means, you can go and stay out as late as you like because I know you're responsible to make good decisions that I've endeavored to teach you, for example. So speaking truth to power is a really important thing. So that's one of my bad habits that I had to account for. A second one that he was really helpful in sharing with me to consider, he was saying, Dad, you are, how did he say it now? He said, you are always complaining. Yes, because we're talking about bad habits. I have a bad habit of always being on the kids' case about cleanliness and keeping things, in order and tidy and that kind of thing. And so maybe that's a communication there that I should be aware of how I'm communicating that directive, and maybe a different way of communicating it would be helpful so that they're able to consider it for themselves and something that is in their control to be able to implement or not based on the kind of people that they're growing up to be. So I acknowledge that one there too. My sister, her only suggestion was, she said, you do have a bad habit of sometimes going over the speed limit. busted. So that's one of my bad habits. Yeah, I'm a professional driver. Yes, I'm an Uber driver. Yes, when I have my riders, I am always endeavoring to be professional and make sure that they feel safe. They're not worried about my driving skills. So maybe I'm a lot more careful then. But when I'm on my own time, it may be the case that I do drive a little bit faster than necessary. And so that's the one that she was bringing to my attention. I thought of one while we were talking earlier too, and that was, let me just rack my mind here again. What was that? It was in the it was about time management, double booking myself. Yes, I have a habit of double booking myself. Yes. So this is one of those expressions for me that I struggle with, and that's double booking myself in stuff. So that's a tough one. When I double book myself, it's like, oh man, I did that again. And I don't like double booking myself, especially because um, hmm, that's somebody else's time there, right? That I'm being accountable for, someone else's time that I I'm asking them to share with me, and I don't want to waste that time, right? So double booking, yeah, I do that because I usually rely on my own memory, thinking, okay, I think this is what I have going on, and so I end up double booking myself, and then I have to reschedule with those individuals. I don't like that dynamic. So here are some steps that I'm taking to address these areas of my life. With the double booking, I actually keep an active calendar going in my phone, and I check with that almost on a daily basis, and that's really served me well. Um, I don't double book as often anymore, so that's a step I'm taking to address that. On the driving front, I think I'm working on that. I'm being more aware of when I am speeding, and uh, working to nullify those expressions of trying to be, at a certain place at a certain time when it isn't that big of a deal. Like I can still make it there safely and so on, right? So that's important. So I am working on that one there too. On the front that my son was mentioning, I think I'm just gonna have to be aware of how I'm communicating to them. Um, and not being naggy. So I don't want to nag. I don't want to be on the case that way. So I'd like to maybe shift that more. I haven't done it yet, but I want to implement a change there in the way I'm able to help my kids with certain things that I want them to be aware of in their growing up. That's important for me because they're growing older, and I want to earn their trust, right? I want to earn their trust. I want to still be a place where they can share their questions, ideas, etc. And so that's important. Um, yes. Let me answer your question just a moment here, Zesty. That's a really good question. And then finally, on the chewing with my mouth full, my son is rigorous in helping me be aware, and so I think that's been helpful. I don't do it as often, I think, but I better be aware of that. Actually, that's an important one that I don't want to rely on him primarily for. So I'll check on that. Zesty asks, Biniam, has anyone signed up for your help on your website? Oh, for help on your website? The answer to that, Zesty, is no. No one has. No one has signed up there. And so that's been a bit of a discouragement for me. That's been a significant discouragement for me this this past weekend. I made a significant decision that was really discouraging. So after investing, a good month and a half on this business venture that I've been trying to put together for some time here, and going really hard at, doing all the things that I've been learning along the way, Zesty, um, there hasn't been any response. No one has signed up. Why do you think that is? Do you think the price was too high? Maybe it was the price that was too high. Maybe it was that. Although, like from what I was studying and reading in by way of marketing, they're saying make sure that you're offering a quality product. And I feel like my offering was quality because I have I've done this for years, right? And they're saying when you price it at a higher price mark, people take it seriously, right? People take it seriously where they're like, okay, I'm paying for this. I want to get my money's worth. So I didn't have any qualms about pricing it. I even priced it lower than I thought it was worth. And yet, maybe it's just that I don't have the reach anymore, market wise. Maybe I don't know. Marketing isn't my forte, but I did the best that I could. I've just gotten to a point now where I can't extend myself anymore. So it's been a really discouraging and sad experience for me to make the decision I made this past weekend, and that is to back a little bit from the business venture and get back to work. I'm really depleted now, resources wise, so I'm kind of behind the eight ball right now, economically. So I did something that was something I didn't want to do for a long time. I signed up. I'm going for a job interview tomorrow, and so I'll let you know tomorrow how that goes. But stay tuned. So that's what's going on in my world, guys. Thanks for being a part of this podcast. I will see you tomorrow. Love you guys. Bye.